everyone, we are going to get started. Thank you for joining us this evening for this public informational meeting on the Eastern Connecticut Corridor Rail and Transit Feasibility Study. We'll get started with a few housekeeping items. This meeting is being recorded and it is also being live streamed on Connecticut DOT's YouTube channel. You can send us any questions or comments regarding the study. It can be emailed to dotplanning@ct.gov or you can dial in to 860-944-1111. More information is available on the study website at the following URL that you can see on the screen. That's https://portal.ct.gov/eastern-connecticut-rail. I'll also start off with our Title VI notice to the public. The Connecticut Department of Transportation operates its programs and services without regard to race, color, and national origin. In accordance with Title VI of the Civil Rights Act, any person who believes she or he has been aggrieved by an unlawful discriminatory practice under Title VI may file a complaint with the Connecticut DOT. And you can see information as to filing a complaint. And for more information, you can also visit our website to access the Title VI rights on our contract compliance page. We also invite you to complete the voluntary post-meeting survey. You can see the URL on the screen for that. That will allow us to collect information regarding the meeting itself so that we can improve upon our public information procedures. A recording of this presentation will also be posted to YouTube after the live event. Closed captioning, including non-English translation options, will also be available at that time. I'll now introduce myself. I'm Elise Greenberg. I am a transportation planner at the Connecticut Department of Transportation, and I am the project manager of this study. I'm also joined by Jill Cahoon from AECOM, which is our consultant team supporting us with this study, and she is the project manager from AECOM on the study. I'm also joined by Maureen Lawrence from our Bureau of Public Transit on the bus operations side and transit and ride sharing, and Yuri Kulgis, who is a rail administrator also from our Bureau of Public Transportation as well. Our presentation will now proceed with the study overview, and then we will be going over the progress to date and then moving on to next steps of the study. This study has commenced by the legislative direction to investigate the feasibility and market for the following items: extending Shoreline East rail service to the state of Rhode Island, establishing a new passenger rail service from the city of New London to the city of Norwich, establishing a new passenger train station in the town of Groton and Stonington Borough, and extending other ground transportations in the eastern region of the state and providing interconnectivity between those systems and rail lines. And before we begin, we want to first define what a feasibility study is. It's the first step in evaluating the viability of service in a corridor. Then, depending on the findings, further increasingly detailed studies and designs may follow. So what we're really taking a look at with this study is understanding if additional service would be viable based on infrastructure and operational needs, as well as if there is a market and there is demand for that service. And taking a look at the study scope and the timeline, we are anticipating wrapping this study up. We're targeting October of 2023. It is a very large, comprehensive study, and we are trying to make sure that we are taking a look at everything in order to really do the assessment properly. We are documenting existing conditions, doing a feasibility analysis for the Norwich corridor. We are also doing a feasibility analysis for the extension of Shoreline East. We are looking at station siting as well as doing a transit-oriented development assessment of those potential station areas. We're going to be looking at system equipment and service. We are also going to be looking at those ground transportation connections, including bus and other ground transportation such as bike ped that would facilitate connections to those potential stations. We're going to be looking at ridership forecasts, cost projections, both on the capital and operating side, as well as doing some revenue projections. And all of that is going to lead into a final report. And to help inform our study, we're also doing a lot of engagement activities. And so we have multiple different engagement groups to help inform the study. We have a steering committee that helps steer this direction of the study. And we're going to be doing 4 meetings with the steering committee total. We're going to be doing 2 meetings with each working group. We are also doing a public survey, which is currently active. You hopefully have seen a link outside in the lobby area, and we invite you to take the survey afterward or anytime. It is active through the month of December. We're also holding this current public meeting, as well as we will be holding another meeting in summer when we have findings and results to present. And we are doing targeted stakeholder interviews with major employers and acre institutions along the corridor. So just to add a little bit more detail to those working groups, there are 5 working groups total helping to inform this study. We have a municipal working group in which the first meeting occurred in June of this past year. We then followed up with those members of the municipal working group, which largely consists of town planners and town engineers and economic development directors from the municipalities. We followed up for a greater understanding of development plans within each municipality. We also met last week with the chief elected officials from each municipality to give them a briefing of the status of the study. We then also have a transit, microtransit, and bike ped working group. We had our first meeting in June of 2022. We followed up with members of that group and for additional data, which we have received and has been greatly helpful for our assessments. As I mentioned, we have been doing stakeholder interviews with major employers and anchor institutions. We are continuing to meet with those critical stakeholders throughout this winter. We also met with the rail working group in October of 2022. Those members consist of the operators of the commuter service, which is Amtrak, and as well as the freight service along the Norwich corridor. And we have a customer focus working group, which we plan to meet in early 2023 following this round of engagement. So right now we are wrapping up our preliminary analyses, which consists of study area demographics and travel patterns, and corridor assessment of the Thames River corridor. We've been looking at conceptual station site reviews, a transit-oriented development corridor scan, and a corridor capacity analysis. And all of that folds into this preliminary feasibility analysis, which is what we are currently wrapping up. So I'll now turn it over to Jill Cahoon, who will go into a little bit more detail of the progress to date toward this preliminary analysis.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this evening to jump into some of our progress to date. First, we'll look at the historic looking study area demographics and travel patterns, and also some more recent information. To start, what's shown here is a map of population density across our study area. You can see our study area here is comprised of the towns along the corridors in which we're looking at possible extension of service. That includes the Thames River corridor, the east and west sides of the river from New London to Norwich, as well as along the shoreline east, possible shoreline east extension along the northeast corridor from New London to Westerly, Rhode Island. We did meet with Rhode Island Department of Transportation and decide on Westerly as the terminus in consultation with the Rhode Island Department of Transportation. So you'll see that the study area that we're looking at here, you can see the population density is along those corridors that we're looking at, and it's also, as well as other pockets. And it's also important to note that we're looking at these study area communities that have the potential for expanded rail and bus service that we're looking at evaluating. But we're not just looking at these communities, we're actually looking at a much wider region as well to understand where people are coming from in order to go to the major destinations and anchor institutions located within this study area. So that includes into Rhode Island, further north into Connecticut, further west into Connecticut, and understanding those connections. We also are looking at the population characteristics and socioeconomic information around the study area communities. This map shows the areas of higher social vulnerability, environmental justice communities. So you can see that there are pockets of environmental justice communities in New London and in Norwich and Groton as well. So we're looking at the different demographic and socioeconomic characteristics of the study area. We're also, as I mentioned, trying to understand where people are coming from as they access the major destinations and anchor institutions in this region. So you can see on the top map, this is where folks are who live in the study area are going. So you can see that a lot of folks living in the study area are going to employment locations, actually still within the study area, and then along up the coast towards Providence, as well as over to Hartford. The bottom map is actually showing for people who work in the study area, where are they coming from? Where do they live? And you can see a similar pattern as well. A lot of people who work in the study area also live within the study area, but they're coming from a larger region, further north in Connecticut, as well as coming from Hartford and points west, as well as all the way from Providence, further to the east. In order to understand the more recent patterns that have been shown in the area, especially coming out of the pandemic, there's a lot of changes in travel patterns. We are using data that's called streetlight data. It's a third-party data source that comes from cell phone data, and that shows us where people are coming from in order to get to the major destinations within the study area. So we looked at activity centers across the study area like Foxwoods, the Groton Subbase, Mohegan Sun, Mystic, New London Center, Norwich Center, Pfizer and Electric Boat, Stonington, and Westerly. These are our activity centers. So we were trying to understand where people are coming from and when and in what volume to get an idea of where people, the movements of folks coming into those major activity centers. So you can see on this graph here that the blue on the far left of each of those activity centers shows all days, an average of all days, that's average daily volume coming into each of these major activity centers. The red bar in the middle shows the weekday average commute volumes, and the green bar shows the average weekend daily volumes. So you can see for some of our activity centers, they have much more volume on the weekends. For example, Mystic, Mohegan Sun, and Foxwoods, which probably doesn't surprise folks so much. And then some of our other activity centers like Pfizer and Electric Boat and the Groton Subbase have more of a weekday draw of folks coming into these activity centers. So moving forward, we are also looking at the existing transit and active transportation services that are available in the study area. So there's actually quite a lot going on. There are 9 different transit and rail providers operating in the area. There are Amtrak regional trains serving both New London and Mystic. There are Shoreline East trains that come into New London, 23 trains per day. There are 21 different bus routes, a lot of them from mostly from Seat, but Wyndham also comes into the study area, as well as 9 Town Transit. There are 3 on-demand services one of which is the RIPTA from the Rhode Island Public Transit Authority. There are 2 intercity bus routes, and there are 4 ferry routes. So there's several different operators within this study area, and we're looking at that both in the context of how people travel throughout the region, as well as how they would access any potential station areas or new station sites. We're also looking at active transportation options within the region, again, looking more regionally, but then also looking at how at the access at potential station sites. Then looking forward, we are evaluating, as we've talked about, the 2 different types of corridors. One, the Thames River corridor, which is actually really 2 corridors. It's the east and the west side of the Thames River. And then, of course, the Shoreline East extension along the shore. So for the Thames River, there are 1 to 2 trains per day, freight trains per day, that are operating within the corridor on both the east and the west sides. They're both operated by Genesee and Wyoming. And they are operating at very, very low speeds. So the rail lines would have to be, the track would have to be updated in order to be able to operate passenger service, as well as there's a lot of grade crossings, and there are also, there would need to be a lot of technology upgrades as well. So we are identifying preliminary capital cost upgrades as part of this study. Additionally, if warranted, we would also identify that there would need to be future studies as well that would need to go into moving forward if this type of service is moved forward, including bridge inspections with load ratings, grade crossing inspections, utility coordination, positive train control, feasibility. So a lot of these having to do with the areas that I mentioned previously. Then looking at this corridor, as well as the corridor between New London and Westerly, we are looking at possible station sites. We are looking across 7 different zones for possible station areas. So you'll see we have zones on each side of the Thames River. We have the zone in Groton along the main line. We have the Groton secondary, and then we have locations in Stonington as well. So for each of these zones, we're looking at 2 or 3 different possible station sites, and we're conducting an analysis to help us to narrow those numbers down, so that really we're only looking at 1 station site in the end in each of these zones, again, depending on the analysis. We're looking at things like compatibility with surrounding land use, site constraints, market development potential, and we'll talk a little bit more about transit-oriented development here in a moment. We're looking at environmental considerations, very coastal and riverine areas. We're also looking at transit-supportive land use and operational feasibility. So we're cataloging the information that will help inform future analysis and recommend priority station sites based on this evaluation. Speaking of transit-oriented development, we are also looking at transit-oriented development at the corridor level. So we are looking at the potential station areas, but we're kind of looking at a higher level for now. In future phases of the study, we'll actually, once we have a narrowed number of conceptual station sites, we'll go into more detail with the transit-oriented development. So at the corridor level, we are looking at a 2-mile buffer along the corridors, the Thames River corridor and the Northeast corridor. And like I said, it's a corridor level scan at this point. So highlights within that 2-mile radius of the rail lines are 6 of the region's 8 major employers are located within that zone. There are concentrations of office buildings, multifamily housing in New London and Norwich, as well as Mystic and Groton. And there are some dispersed retail nodes in that area as well. Now, looking historically, We are looking at population and trends historically, and employment trends and housing trends historically. So it's been historically, again, an aging and shrinking population, slower negative employment growth, lack of modern housing, and limited mobility options. But we know that looking forward, there are projections of growth in both population and employment. So we're looking at what those opportunities look like. And with projected growth, we're looking at what new transit investment, improved travel times, and direct connections to local employers look like in the context of transit-oriented development. Then moving into, well, how much train service could actually feasibly fit in the corridors. So the corridor capacity analysis looks at the existing services in the corridors. So for the Thames River corridor, as I mentioned, there's freight rail service in each of those corridors. And along the Northeast corridor, there's Amtrak regional service and Acela service, and projected increases in service as well. So we looked at how much service could fit layered on top of existing services in the area. So for the west and the east side of the Thames River corridor, as I mentioned in the corridor analysis, it's 1 to 2 freight trains per day that are operating along that corridor. So there's really not too many capacity constraints within that corridor. The bigger challenge in that corridor, the Thames River corridor, is the condition of the track infrastructure, as well as the upgrades and technology that would be needed in that corridor. Along the main line, with the possible Shoreline East extension from New London to Westerly, it is conceptually feasible to add 1 commuter train per hour in each direction. And the biggest constraint in that area is the movable bridge, and that can only be open for a certain amount of time with other regulation. A second train could be possible, but that would be a substantial investment and changes with the constraints around the movable bridge, which is a big undertaking. So it is conceptually feasible to look at these, to have capacity in these corridors with those limitations. So that was a really quick overview of our findings to date and the technical analyses that we are looking at. And I'll turn it back over to Elise, but we'll have boards and be able to answer more questions out in the lobby area following the presentation.
Thank you, Jill. So in terms of what's next, as I had mentioned earlier on, we are in the middle of wrapping up our preliminary feasibility assessment, and that will all be rolled into a report that will be made available in early 2023. And depending on the findings that are in the preliminary feasibility analysis, that assessment will be used to define a path forward. We'll be looking at refining the corridors and possible station sites. We'll also be conducting a much more detailed market and TOD analysis. As Jill had mentioned, right now we are looking at it at a higher corridor level, but we'll be looking at it more in terms of actual potential station areas as we continue on. We'll also be identifying rail and transit service options. And we'll be estimating ridership potential, especially based on future development plans, as well as estimating costs, both from a capital improvement standpoint as well as operations. And we'll also be doing some revenue estimates as well. And all of those results will be used to inform decision-making around further study in the corridor. In terms of upcoming engagement, we are continually updating our study website. We'll be meeting early in 2023 with the steering committee as well as the customer focus working group. And currently right now, we do have a survey open to the public that will be active through the month of December. And for quick access, there's a QR code right here to the study website, I believe. And that will lead you either to the survey or other information about the study, and including draft reports as those become available. Those will be posted on the study website. And so again, this is now the slide that has the QR codes to the different language options for the survey, and as well as the study website URL. So again, thank you everyone for joining us tonight. We will now open the meeting up to questions. And after that, you're welcome to peruse around the different poster boards or take the survey out in the lobby.
Hello, my name is Tim Sullivan. I am a local regional resident, and I've looked actually into the idea of New London to North Rail myself, and I'm going to say that, as you know, yeah, as you pointed out clearly, there are two corridor options for Norwich to New London Rail. One being owned by the New England Central on the western bank, and the other owned by the province of Worcester on the eastern bank, both of which are in turn owned by the Genesee and Wyoming, as you mentioned. But what I'm going to bring up this is that I've noticed that on the western bank route, all of the major areas, including Norwich Transportation Center and all the access to all the bus routes in Norwich, Mohegan Sun, they're all in the northern half of the route. And meanwhile, if you look, all the major advantages of the eastern bank route, the sub base, Groton City, Groton itself, and Gales Ferry, they're all in the southern half. And so I propose that if this gets passed, that instead of taking one or the other, because if we take one or the other, each one gets advantages. The western route misses out on Groton and the sub base, and EB, which are very high potential, are just great areas to look into for this kind of transit and development. By contrast, if we go with the eastern route, while we'll get those areas in Groton and whatnot, we'll miss out direct access to Mohegan Sun, and not only that, but in order to get to Norwich, we'll take a route that goes away from Norwich Transportation Center, which prevents a lot of transfer options to that the western route, which goes right by Norwich Transportation Center, easily could accomplish. Thus, I have an idea that instead of using one or the other, at around Gales Ferry, Uncasville, you'd go along the eastern route through the Groton City and the sub base, and then take a build a bridge across the Thames. I propose, and this bridge would then connect into Uncasville, where it'd head up the rest of the way, stopping at Mohegan before Norwich Transportation Center, allowing for a direct transfer to seat buses and any of the seat routes you want to go. And I propose that the Norwich Transportation Center be extended with because there's like a big open space, if you didn't know, between the transportation center and Route 32. That similarly to how the parking lot to the parking garage area extends over the bus area, it would extend in the other direction, but instead of a parking garage, it would be a lobby where you could have you could put in shops, and you could put seating in for people to sit down, and you could get ticket machines, ticket booths, with escalators and stairs and elevators down to multiple platforms. In addition, I'd propose that since the Norwich corridor would already require a ton of investment, that we could potentially use that as an opportunity to go for double tracking the corridor to make sure to increase capacity. Because as of now, both corridors are generally single track. The eastern corridor owned by the province of Worcester does have a couple quad track and double track and double track sections, but they're mostly for yards and sidings. So, but actually double tracking the corridor would mean that you could have northbound trains run on one track and southbound trains run on the other without having to move trains onto sidings in order to maneuver out of the way. And of course, you'd have to bring up other updates such as of course replacing the older jointed rail with welded rail, and and potentially replacing older wooden ties with concrete ties, but that's it takes quite a lot of knowledge to. That's more in-depth stuff that I don't think most people would know. And I actually have quite a lot of ideas, including ideas for potential seat routes. And personally, I'm going to argue that potentially I think we should restore the old, what's now at least the Hop River rail trail from around Manchester Vernon to Willimantic, potentially to connect up with the existing NECR down through Franklin to Norwich to create commuter rail, to create potentially regional rail service on that corridor connecting down through Willimantic to Norwich and potentially New London. I really think that that corridor could be massively beneficial to the economy. It would allow for people who either can't afford a car or whatnot to get from these areas to Hartford and New London. And in turn, it would help create a stronger backbone for Connecticut transit that would allow us to move away from car dependency and towards a more sustainable environmentally friendly form of transportation society. In addition, it could give us a potential backbone for further restorations of rail lines, such as the rail line through Sterling and Coventry to Providence, and the line from around Newington, it's from Danbury to Waterbury, to potentially create a sort of third northeast corridor through the center of Connecticut that connects Hartford to Providence. But that's a bunch of other stuff. That's not related to the main core of the issue, which is this study. Now, finally, just a few more thoughts. Personally, I think that just the fact is that Connecticut is one of the densest states in the country. It easily is one of the best states for transit and railroads in general. Whereas most states in this country are a lot of times built out large suburbs with tons and tons of disconnected highways, and oftentimes with metropolitan areas hundreds of miles away from each other. Connecticut has tons and tons and tons of very dense, walkable areas nearby specific corridors that allow for easy transit development that I really think have potential. I'm not going to get into that because this, again, I mentioned North London, but I just really wanted to get my ideas out there. And in the end, I feel as if, and I'll just say one more proposal for seat buses, not the actual trains. I'd propose personally a circular route around Norwich that starts at the seat center, goes up Route 12 and up to Taftbill, then down like near the Canterbury Turnpike towards Norwich through Norwich Town, then continuing down the New London Turnpike through West End down to Mohegan Sun, and then crossing the things at 2A, and then heading back up Route 12 back to Norwich Transportation Center. That would allow for a ton of connections, allowing people on the eastern half of the river to go back to the western half of the river, allowing people to go from Norwich Town to Mohegan Sun efficiently. A lot of ton of connections I think would really be beneficial. But I think I've had the floor for long enough, so I'll let someone else take a stand.
Thank you very much for your ideas, and we welcome additional ideas if you want to email the contact email on the screens. Are there any other questions or comments at this time?
Hi, I'm Pete Hoover from Mystic. I was just going to ask you a question, whether you're thinking about doing a time phase study, because it seems to me that the Northeast Corridor work could be done quickly, whereas the Norwich line would take more effort, and that you could certainly have Amtrak add additional stops to the corridor and get the shoreline stops done with the existing stations fairly quickly, and then add in the other stations and then go ahead and work on the Norwich line. And I was wondering whether your recommendations will break that up, or whether you're going to have it be tightly coupled.
Absolutely, that's a very good question. That is something that we are going to be integrating into the study in terms of a phased approach. Depending on the findings as we progress onward with the study, we will be basing our recommendations on a phased approach of what might be shorter term recommendations versus midterm recommendations versus long term. And again, all of that is dependent on ultimately what we see as viable, but we will be looking at and considering a phased approach.
Okay. So, are you in discussions with Amtrak about making more stops at the existing stations? Because as a Mystic resident, it's kind of frustrating to only have 2 trains a day when, trains are passing every hour.
Amtrak is part of our rail working group for this study. So they are aware of the study and we are in coordination with them and gathering their input and informing the study's results.
All right, very good. Thank you so much.
Are there any other questions?
Can we actually return to Stan quickly? I should have one more to say. About the proposed additional train per hour, I personally absolutely agree with it. I think that it could potentially be used for in which where in which every hour 2 trains go from New Haven to New London and Groton, but that one of those trains every hour will go up Norwich, the other to Westerly. This would allow for still frequent frequent for North America service between all these areas, and from whether you're going to New London, Norwich, Westerly, and allowing for interconnectivity throughout the entirety of the corridor. So I do think that potentially if we're able to increase the frequency to 30 trains to 30, well, not 30 trains an hour, 2 trains an hour, 30-minute frequency at minimum, that should be up to New London and split from Westerly and Norwich respectively.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And then I just really wanna
Hi, how's it going? My name is Benjamin. I live in Mystic. I commute up to Boston twice a week for work. And typically I take Amtrak, which is it's an exceptionally comfortable way to commute. The seats are very comfy and they recline, and there's the bar car. But it isn't very ideal in the sense there are only 4 departures a day. For me, the really only feasible trip up leaves at 9:36. You don't get to Boston until 11, and then I happen to work further out in the city, which takes me extra time. So the timing isn't very ideal for commuting. On top of it, Amtrak is similar to the airlines. It's in the business of intercity travel and not as much commute travel. So if I don't book 2 weeks out, where I can usually get a saver ticket at $18 each way, it's normally very expensive, and then I have to drive up, which is not always the best. And on top of it, on the weekends, whether I want to go up to Boston or go down to New York, it's just also very difficult. The trains sell out. People like to travel on the weekend. So we really are, I find, just while Mystic's a really pleasant place to live, if you kind of want to get out of Mystic, it gets a little bit difficult, especially on the weekends and in the summer. Traffic's pretty horrendous on 95. I think we all know that. So just again, with, I think short line east would be a great thing. But if somehow something could be not only more frequent and allow a later departure from New York, but also either a time connection at Westerly or a 1-seat ride. I'd finally say back in the days, the the New Haven, the New York, New Haven, and Hartford ran a train that they called the Clam Digger, that offered local service from New Haven to Providence, and then it expressed in either direction. And something like that, again, a couple times a day could potentially be very ideal for really all the shoreline communities because 95 is just a disaster. And again, while Amtrak is lovely, if you can't really make a spur of the moment decision to go up. Even the 10 trip ticket deal, it's $300. So that's just my view.
Okay, this time I actually have a question, not a proposal again. But it's a question about particularly the section of the Northeast Corridor from around Westerly to Waterford, particularly about two things. One, are you looking into potentially, in particular for Westerly Station and New London Station? I'm not sure about Mystic Station, but probably too. The raising of platforms to high-level platforms to offer level boarding and ADA compliance for those areas. In addition, are you looking into grade separation of the core, into potentially grade separating and getting rid of dangerous rail crossings that force trains to slow down at lower speeds and can cause conflict points that potentially lead to fatalities and are proven to decrease capacity on the corridor and are just dangerous in general? Those are really my two questions that.
So this is Yuri Kulgis. I'm an assistant rail administrator for the Office of Rail. Going to your first question about the high-level platforms. Yes, we are looking into that because this is an expansion of the Shoreline East. So we currently have the M8s operating on the Shoreline East. So that will be a requirement in order for us to expand the Shoreline East. So we'll be looking at high-level platforms to make sure that they have all the ADA accommodations. And what was the second
The
question?
second question is about grade separation and how, and grade crossings and removing them, replacing them with underpasses or overpasses.
So we will look into that too. We want to make sure that we have a safe corridor.
Yep.
So in order to increase the trains.
Yep.
So that will be part also of, the study.
Actually, I do have one more thing, and that is about New London Station. I do think that it would be really nice to have a pedestrian bridge that goes over the tracks at New London train station. So that way people aren't stuck on one or other side and the train comes. I think it would help massively benefit the accessibility and the ability for people to move around the station in general.
So in London, there is a lot of different projects. You do have the Coast Guard Museum that will install pedestrian overpass. But again, we're doing a lot of ADA improvements at the station too, but that's excellent.
Yeah. And just one more thing about the it's about, what was it? Shit. Shoot. Head. Oh yeah. So about Norwich service in particular. So as you may or may not know, the Northeast Corridor is electrified. And the trains that we use on the Northeast Corridor for both Amtrak and CT Rail are electric. Amtrak uses Acela train, the Alstom Bombardier Acela train sets. And later is going to be using the Alstom Avalia Liberty train sets. Amtrak uses ACS 64 electric locomotives pulling Amfleet coaches. And then, of course, those are all owned by Amtrak. And then CT Rail uses M8s on Shoreline. So of course, it uses P40 DCs and GP40, the H dash whatever GP40 variants it is on the Hartford line. But for Norwich service, in order for the thing is that most that unless you're doing just Norwich to New London, which is a rather short service and would force people to transfer at New London, you're more likely to be doing really more New Haven, New London, Norwich. And so most of that is electrified. But the problem comes is from New London to Norwich, that's all diesel. So the idea, so really is will you be looking into whether it's smarter to buy dual mode locomotives, such as similar to what Amtrak's plan to do with its plan to buy dual mode Siemens chargers for replacing all of its Northeast Corridor equipment, or would it be just smart to just electrify the corridor as a whole with full-on electrification and catenary and just have running the M8s and electric trains all the way up as a whole?
No, that's a good question. I know you brought a lot of previous comments too about the single track. So the study is going to look at, what the freight is using, what the passenger will look at, and if it's an electrification or a phase, we'll have to look into that. You're bringing excellent comments about all of this, and we'll look into.
Thank you. Are there any other questions or comments?
So I don't have as many in-depth conversation that the previous speaker has been bringing forward, but I'd like to talk a little bit about the money. And so we have talked about subsidies. Will you include subsidies as a part of what it would be required for subsidies for the part of both the Norwich line and the line going up to Rhode Island? Is that part of the concept that you're looking at?
We are going to be later on in the study doing cost estimating. So we are going to be looking at capital costs, operating costs, and we'll be doing some revenue projections based on the ridership estimates. That being said, based on sort of the way the math works out, I guess it could be assumed that there would be a measure of subsidy that would be involved, but we won't be looking, again, this will be all estimates, and we won't be looking at like potential sources of funding at this point in the study.
So I know that you're not going to say to the General Assembly, you have to put in X number of dollars in as subsidy for the expansion of Shoreline East. But I'd like to see also a concept which not only looks at what it would be based on what the current ridership is, but the fact is that we will see 2 more subs in the down at the sub base. That will bring an additional number of families here. We will see an increase of workers at Electric Boat. That will see a number of people moving into the region, which will see an increase of potential ridership in the area. So I'd like to not only see what current is, but the projections of the expanded workforce and the ultimate expansion of the families that would be accompanying that workforce, so that we could look at not just what it is today, because that's always one of the things that shoots down a Shoreline East expansion, is that people look at it and they say it's going to be too expensive. Why are we spending this much? But we would have spent this much in the western part of the state or the New Haven region, and they have been able to expand their population time and time and time again. We keep losing population, but we know that our workforce is going to drive a need of increased population and increased families. And so I want to make sure that we're pointing out the fact that if we see that increase in workforce, which is absolutely necessary in the defense industry, absolutely necessary at the sub base, that we will see an increased need. So I'd like to make sure that we incorporate that and don't leave it just dead-ended with today's population.
Absolutely. We are going to be doing ridership projections as a part of the study. So as you mentioned, we are going to be looking at future ridership estimates and taking into account that projected growth based on future employment, future developments happening for housing. That's one of the reasons why we're also trying to get information gathered through interviews with major employers and other anchor institutions to understand their future needs in the corridor for jobs and access to transportation, and also why we're trying to understand at the local level what development plans there are for both commercial office space and housing.
Because I just want to make sure that we're not being sidelined again, like we have in the past, when people say Shoreline East is just too expensive. It's not too expensive, and it's like a chicken and the egg. The population is going to get larger here. We know it is. So we might as well project now for it and not wait until it actually happens. We shouldn't wait for that population to grow. We should prepare for it ahead of time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, thank you for coming out to Eastern Connecticut State Representative Conley. I'm here to talk about the study, and I wanted a couple points I wanted to make. The first is how frustrated I would say a lot of us in Eastern Connecticut are with our lack of public transport. I often in my office I get emails and calls all the time. I went on to look how do I commute to Hartford, and it takes 3 hours by bus. It takes 40 minutes to get from where we currently are by car to Hartford. So you're not going to take the 3-hour bus ride if you're going to buy a car and you're going to have that expense and you're going to pay for the gas. Where I live and where I work in Groton, I can get from my house to my office in a 10-minute bicycle ride. I cannot get there by a bus. I cannot get from my house in Groton to the other side of my district to see the new London mayor sitting behind me. I cannot get there easily by public transport. I have to take 2 different buses and it would take over 45 minutes. It's a 5-minute car ride from my house to his office. What we have in public transport is encouraging a society where each of us own our own vehicles and each of us drives ourselves to our needs, our work needs, our school needs, our shopping needs. And we have all of these cars on the road. And without the investment in a new way, we will not change our behavior because our behavior is convenient for those who have the ability to have a car. Our behavior is also horrible for the environment. It is not good that you have a senator and 2 reps who each took their own vehicles here because we don't have another way. When I went on my phone while folks were talking, and I said, what would it take me to take a bus ride back to my house? Again, it's 20 minutes away by car. It's 2 hours right now if I wanted to take a bus home. So of course, and that included a 45-minute walk between the station because we're not in a route. I'm not going to do that. And without the investment of rail and of more buses, we're going to continue to repeat this cycle of continued every adult has a vehicle. And that's the way that we're getting from point A to point B. Now, with our growth of Groton and New London with electric boat, we have a parking problem. We all know we have a parking problem. On the subbase, we have a parking problem. In downtown Mystic, we have a parking problem. And by each and every one of us taking our cars every place we need to go, we're continuing to pave over land that could be parks, land that could be open space, land that could be affordable housing to put our cars so we can get to work and school and store and errands. And we can do better, but we do need to invest. And I appreciate you guys doing the study, but please be aware the timelines. So we currently have a president who is very, very open to rail. And we can utilize the opportunity by Biden being in the office for the next 2 years to leverage federal dollars. And I would hope that we do not delay and that we take advantage of our federal dollars being used for rail, because this is an investment that can pan out for generations in this side of the state. To start the transfer from our own vehicles to more public transport, to start the transfer on how we're going to live and how we choose to be together. Hopefully, get rid of some of those parking lots, have some more affordable housing, and have each of us spend some time on the train on public transport together and not singularly in our vehicles, just spending hours and hours of commuting in traffic, and really change what we need to do. So I appreciate you guys being here, and I hope you see the vision of getting more cars off the road and more people on public transport.
Chris, would you tell them who I was? 'Cause I didn't.
That was Senator Austin, who represents 9 lovely towns in Eastern Connecticut.
Thank you.
Sorry. Do your thing.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Kerry Red. I am the CEO Director of Transportation in the City of New London. It is very encouraging to sit and hear your ideas about the feasibility study. Certainly some of the things that you have articulated are the things that we have advocated for many decades in the city, not only for New London, but the Southeast region as a whole. I would like to speak on two different aspects of what you presented today. First and foremost, Mayor Passero and I have had some conversations with the Federal Transit Administration on the subject of ADA compliance. And so as part of your feasibility study, please take in consideration that both Amtrak as well as the municipality of New London is embarking upon improvements in ADA both at the Water Street Garage, and there are active projects that are going on at Union Station currently. Two of the other things that we have worked in concert about is improvements on platforms, as well as informational displays, which provides the ridership with timetables for both incoming and outgoing departures. Secondly, independent of the state DOT, we have received funding to create a transit station. It's encouraging from the young lady who's just left that public transportation as a youngster who walked a half a mile and then a mile to get to a bus, that a year ago, we instituted an on-demand service. And as we begin to look at the demographics, we find that we are able to provide point-to-point public transportation at a very affordable level from those employees' homes to the transit center in downtown New London, which allows them to use not only transit, but rail to commute into the New York and even into the Boston areas, as well as just across the river. So as you mature your feasibility study, I would advocate that you speak to us so that we can have concert with our ideas. And we certainly are encouraged with your efforts to expand Shoreline East. But as the senator most accurately pointed out, we've been at this particular table before and come back with empty plate. And so if things are happening at the federal level, it is somewhat remiss for the state not to be a partner of that particular discussion. And I've called Garrett and Pam and many of your other peers in Newington on these subjects over the last 5, 6 years in order to get some kind of motivation to become an active participant in this area. Our demographics are showing, just as the senator had pointed out, that employment is rising. From 0 to 1, we're doing about 5,000 point-to-point rides or trips on a daily basis, of which about 40% are individuals that are coming to the downtown area in order to get to their ultimate employment destination. Why is that important? Is because of the comment that the young lady just made, that we're moving single use vehicles off of the highway systems, off of the thoroughfares within the city. And that has an immediate impact on reducing the ozone layer because of the greenhouse gases. And over the next few months, we will be conducting a study to see and kind of quantify that number so we can pass that on to Washington to let them know exactly what our efforts will result in. And last but not least is that of parking capacity. We have done an enormous number of studies, and so therefore part of our strategy is to build out parking capacity so as the ridership numbers do increase, we have a reservoir so that we can offset the demand to leave that particular vehicle at a singular location and use something that's a little bit more affordable. And as late as today, we installed electric vehicle charging stations in a new surface location with a capacity of about 150 spaces. Again, with the intent of ensuring that our future generations will be able to move forward. And our strategy with inside the municipality is to continue to increase electrification, because we see that as an option that will allow folks to use commuting, both rail as well as transit, and in some cases ferry, in order to get to their employment destination or live, work, and play. But again, I am very encouraged by what you're doing right now. And I would also ask that as you look towards the future, put some concrete substance around what short, mid, and long-term is, because as we look at the project elements, the pedestrian bridge, which I've been working on for about 6 years, and I thank you for leaning your shoulders into that particular decision, because we just received the go-ahead from the DECD in order to move forward on that project, as well as the museum and some of the other things that are there. Thank you very much for your time. At any point, if you would want to take these conversations offline, as the mayor says to me all the time, you're an analytic that do not very often get into the public eye. But I just thought that the fact that you were here this evening, that it would be incumbent upon me to say something about what we're doing. And I can't say enough about the senator who collared me at a meeting a few months ago and said, "Kerry, would you please come and let them know what's going on between your earlobes, because it is rare that you share much of what you're doing. And if you have any questions, don't hesitate to give us a call." Okay?
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Look who's back.
I think there are some other
Oh.
speakers that would like to ask questions. If we could just take those first, please.
Yes.
I'll be brief. I understand there's many who are clamoring to share their thoughts. But first and foremost, want to thank you for the opportunity for the public to weigh in on this feasibility study. I know it's years in the making, and it's great to see that we have finally turned the corner and actually getting the study completed. So thank you for your hard work. And my name is Andre Baumgartner. I'm the state representative-elect for the 41st House District, consisting of the southern half of Groton, from the city of Groton to Mystic, and the southwestern corner of Stonington from Mystic to the borough. Just analyzing the corridor, our district is deeply impacted by this proposal, especially considering the potential for investment, as far as additional commuter rail services that would extend further east, which currently is non-existent, hasn't existed throughout my entire lifetime. We've seen tremendous growth in Mystic, especially as a tourist destination, and just in the last few years since the pandemic, it is very difficult to find a parking spot really anywhere. And I think certainly extending Shoreline East from, at a bare minimum from New London to Mystic could really do a significant, provide a significant help to folks living in Mystic who, have to, in some cases, spend 10, 15 minutes to find a parking spot just within their own neighborhood. If we can take some of the cars out of the community, or, out of the community, and get folks walking, which, certainly in the summer months, you can't beat. So that is something I'm deeply passionate about, is making sure that we get the ball rolling on extending Shoreline East again into Mystic. It's great to see that the proposals to have a terminus in Westerly. If we were to extend Shoreline East, obviously there's a lot of moving parts to that. Certainly with the bridges, and especially the Mystic Bridge. Obviously there's a lot of boat traffic, so ensuring that the Coast Guard is provided their inputs, and there's an action plan in that respect. But there's also several at-grade crossings, where vehicular traffic goes over. I believe my district has the largest or highest concentration of at-grade crossings in the state. There's a total of 5 in Stonington and one in West Mystic. In years past, it's been a significant safety concern. There has been steps to improve safety, but if we're going to increase the number of trains, obviously commuter trains, it's going to have an impact on the community. So safety is obviously first and foremost, ensuring that those neighborhoods, provide their inputs as well, engaging the public. And it's also great to see the proposal of exploring to build a commuter train station in Stonington Borough, which has been sort of overlooked, I think, in the press. A lot of talk about, certainly Groton, building a new train station in Groton, which I'm very much in support of. Location, is very important. One of our, we have a member of the Commuter Rail Council, Zil Stever, who's here with us this evening, who chairs our Resiliency and Sustainability Task Force in Groton. And he's really led the charge on, working with our planning and zoning to highlight the importance of transit-oriented development, especially within our zoning codes, and has identified an area within the downtown, we call downtown Groton, that is currently mostly commercial, but could very much accommodate transit-oriented mixed-use development. So really ensuring that train station is sited there. That way we can expand our mixed-use housing options in town, especially obviously with the unprecedented growth that Senator Austin mentioned and Representative Connolly mentioned with the subbase and certainly electric boat. So the possibilities are endless. Obviously, no shortage of proposals to support, and the big question is how it gets funded. But those are obviously good problems to have when there's a plethora of possibilities. Even though I don't represent Norwich, if we can expand transit options and allow for a train service to go all the way to Norwich and linking some of our other communities, to Groton and Stonington would be quite advantageous. And also making sure that New London, really is the transit hub, and it can really would be the connection, I think, for all of our communities. When I served in the legislature from 2015 to 17, I did submit a bill, just mirroring this. So it's great to see that it's getting over the finish line. But one project that did get funded over our extension bill, Charlene's extension bill, was exploring the possibility of building a train station in Niantic. So kind of curious how that fits in. It's a study that is starting to collect some cobwebs. I know it was, I believe, completed back in 16, and I know the coverage area stops at Waterford, but obviously Niantic, does have some population density. The downtown is, I was reading the paper, the Yale Urban Design Workshop is doing some, looking into their downtown corridor. So that's something to consider as well, just how that fits in with building additional commuter rail stations, as has been proposed with Groton and Stonington Borough. So I'm supportive of everything that has been proposed. Very much welcome, additional public input sessions, for, the neighborhoods to weigh in. But thank you for your work, and happy to support in any way. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Beryl Fishbone, and I'm a problem of the city of Norwich. I'm a resident here. We used to have regular rail, passenger rail service between Norwich and Westerly, and it worked. Times changed, and now we went to individual cars, and now we're returning back to the train station, and I would be thrilled to be able to go there and be able to take a train, or at least a connection, to Westerly, to Providence, to New Haven, to Hartford. You remember them? It kind of goes a little west, but we have no direct route. If you're a resident of Norwich, and for some bizarre reason, you need to go to Hartford for some reason, you have to go to Colchester. And twice a day, there's a bus. It'd be really nice if we could catch a train and be able to get there and from our actual hometown. That would be really good. But the one thing, that wasn't really why I came up here. The one thing that I didn't hear in the presentation and accounts for a large percentage of rail riders, and that's students. It would be wonderful to see that somewhere in your study, you are exploring not only area students going to these other cities, to their schools, to their training facilities, to their colleges, but also opening up the possibility of people from those areas coming to this area, and whether it's Norwich, whether it's Mystic, whether it's Groton, whether it's the subbase, but they could come here using that same transportation and use the facilities and the brain power that we have for training. Students count a lot for when you look at ridership. There's a lot of students. And that could be something that could be really used as a promotion for using the train. They can get here safely. They can get home safely. They can get home easily. And that really should be somewhere in your study, in your project. And I just didn't see it, and I had to mention it. Thank you.
I am just gonna say right off the bat, after everyone that went after me and now before me as well, you all made excellent points. Like truly excellent points. Some that I didn't even think of that I would have loved to mention when I was on the stand here. There's about whether it was about the pollution cars cause or about how students need to ride the train and how there's just so many transit connections we're missing. There's just so many great things were brought up by the lovely people here that came here today. And in general, I think this meeting has shown that there is a strong outcry for support of this line as a whole. That clearly shows a clear underinvestment in transit, in particular this part of the state. Now, I'm going to say that in regards to a few things, every time some transit expansion like this happens, not just here, but across the country, there's always this pushback that constantly happens that, oh, it's too expensive. We can't be spending billions of dollars on wasteful things that nobody will use. Well, the thing is that we spend way more, tens and hundreds of trillions of dollars on highways. As we expand, think about, if you look, for example, the Waco Freeway, it constantly, so when it was created, as it got more and more used, it eventually started getting traffic jams, as most highways do, especially with the growing size of Houston. So they added lanes to increase the capacity. And for short term, that worked. But what happens is that when you add lanes to highways, naturally people are going to start seeing that and using that to try more people start driving on the highway, which increases the amount of cars on the highway in turn, meaning that, and since highway lanes can only hold so many cars because each car is massive on its own and only holds 1 to 5 people each usually. What that means is that inevitably those extra lanes are gonna fill up. And then you get this constant cycle where you add a lane, that lane fills up, traffic gets even worse than it was originally. So you add another lane, then it repeats until you look at Waco Freeway and down Houston, and it's got over 10 lanes of traffic. I think like maybe even 20 something lanes of traffic, and it's constantly in traffic jams. And that's the thing, is that like at California high-speed rail, people always talk about how it's over budget, it's expensive, it's a waste of money. But when people, but like, you'll look at a highway project that's just the same amount cost or even more, nobody bats an eye because when people look at highways, they see it as a public utility, something that the government has to invest in to make a better society. By contrast, people when they see transit, they don't see it that way. They see it because the truth is that a lot of people, especially the ones that usually kind of that make those kind of comments, those are the kind of people who have the money to afford a car. They prefer driving around to their big suburban house far away in the hills. And what happens is that, and since we're such a car-oriented country where there's no way to get anywhere without a car, which the lovely senator brought up earlier. Representative, sorry. But yeah, as the lovely representative brought up earlier, because of that, happens is that people don't see public transit for what it is. Public transit isn't supposed to be making money. It's supposed to be profitable. Public transit is a public service that serves everybody. And I feel like that really needs to be brought up, especially in this age where where car dependency is leading to an unsustainable society that can't environmentally sustain itself. And when people often bring up electric cars as a solution, they ignore the fact that electric cars just don't solve the problems of car dependency, such as the destruction of land and the massive sprawl of cities created by suburbia and the cul-de-sacs and single family housing. And they don't bring up, and it doesn't solve, and in addition, things like electric cars and including other technologies, the battery electric locomotives, which are sort of attempts by freight railroads to try to electrify the rail lines without actually putting in catenary and electrification, that those don't solve the issue. Because really, lithium mining is one of the most polluting things that we have. It is incredibly pollutive. It causes massive environmental damage. And what happens is, in the end, it doesn't really solve the issue because, as I mentioned before, you still have all the problems of car dependency, which I think really is the point. Is that people, when they hear something about transit, and they hear about something on a highway, they're fine with the price tag because they're used to it. It's just a public need. When they hear about something with transit, they have to go into, oh, but will it be profitable? And I just really think that that's an issue that really needs to be dug at, and we really need to fight against in society.
Thank you for
Perception.
your comment. If there are any other questions or comments, we'll take them now. Otherwise, we can move into the lobby area for, Mr. Stever, do you have a question?
Good evening. I'm Zell Stever. I know all of you up front, and I'm very pleased that you're here tonight, kicking off the feasibility study and informing the public about what it is you're doing, and I think that's terrific. I also should mention that in our audience tonight is the new Commissioner of Transportation, and we welcome him to heading up the department. And I think that's very important. And I also should mention that Christine Connolly is the person who introduced the legislation that set this feasibility study in motion. And I'd like to thank her for that effort, and Senator Austin, who's crucial in making sure that the monies became available to make this all happen. I will not make any particular statements tonight about the study at this point. I obviously have been involved with this for some time. I think it's actually 5 years now. Two things that I've not heard tonight, or three things actually. One is that I think the hope is that the southeastern Connecticut will be considered a industrial center or a center of activity in the state, and that the transit system in Connecticut treats it as such, because right now, essentially, all of the trains in the state run or are designed to set up to take people to New York City, where that's considered to be the center of a lot of commerce for our community, our state. And I'd like to, as already been pointed out, we have this huge opportunity with the additional work that's being done on electric boat. And more recently, for those who've been paying attention, Pfizer is now starting to open up facilities and converting office space to laboratory space. And they expect to bring in some 100 additional scientists to work back here in Groton again. And so we are seeing a expansion of our industrial area. It's also pretty clear that we have the Mystic Seaport that's booming. The same thing with the aquarium downtown Mystic. And we're going to have, I think, an expansion taking place in New London with the addition of the potential new Coast Guard Museum at the train station there in New London. The second point is that I haven't heard anybody talk about this, but I think this is important, that I hope this study will really look at what all the options are if we go forward with the Norwich branch line. How do we get that electrified? Do we start out with using battery operated units, or is there an opportunity to do some sort of electrification of the M8 so they can be run up there? And as you probably realize, in Connecticut, basically 40% of our greenhouse gases comes from the highway. And that's significantly above what is the national average of about 26%. And so we have a long way to go to really bring down our greenhouse gas emissions and also improve the air quality in our community by doing it. And while this doesn't solve the whole entire problem for the state, it is at least a beginning here in southeastern Connecticut, where we potentially could become a leader. And so with these thoughts, I simply hope that the study will consider these very carefully in a phased manner. And then has been already brought up about the subsidy associated with rail traffic. And I would say to you all that if you look at the subsidy we provide to the highway, that is the automobiles, cars, and trucks, it is, I suspect, if you do the analysis, it's greatly exceeds what we use to subsidize rail transit. For example, when you look at the budgets of the State Department of Transportation, they talk about billions of dollars for the highways, the bridges, and the roads. And they've already got a huge study underway on the I-95 from Brantford to Westerly. And you may be able to solve all that problem, but I, for one, who has to drive from time to time from Groton to New York City, you may find that fixing up that I-95 corridor between those two links just simply puts you into the traffic jam that runs from basically almost all the time from New Haven all the way to the New York line. And so I think we've got to consider how the trains, the transit system, which has been in fact in operation for over 150 years, how we can bring back using the existing rails that have been used in the past and that are and remain in the ground. How can we maximize that resource for a public good as we sort of go forward? And I'd like to thank you all for the effort. I know it's been a lot of work. I know that there are essentially, as far as I can tell, all of these chief executive officers in this region are for this. And I think hopefully that will be reflected in a positive outcome of this effort. And I think the key is going to be how it gets phased in over time. And then finally, this all becomes much more possible with the fact that this past year, the Congress passed the IRA Act, which funds could potentially fund a good part of this going forward. And so we have the convergence of jobs, we have the convergence of funding to do this, and this may be basically a decade opportunity to really make transit alive here in this part of Eastern Connecticut. Thank you.
There are no questions or comments from new speakers. Then again, thank you everyone for joining us this evening. And if you have any follow-up questions, please email our contact email, please take our survey. And we'll be available in the lobby for you to review our informational poster boards and answer any additional questions you may have.
Thank you.